Hey everyone, I'm here with Stefan Weitz, the CEO of Inflection AI. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you for inviting me.
Of course, yeah, really honored to have you here. I've been here yesterday at the HumanX conference and today, and it's been a really great experience so far, so really excited to get into some of these questions. Yeah, the first thing I want to ask is, there's a lot of startups in this AI industry, so what do you think sets Inflection AI apart from some of the other ones?
I think there are a couple of things. The first is that we were one of those early companies building frontier models.
Mhm.
And one of the 7 companies out of the whole globe that signed these White House commitments. And that's because we were able to build that scale of model.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that has differentiated us is around the conversational intelligence. Some people will talk about it as a combination of IQ and EQ. For us, we spend a lot of time fine-tuning them. And so that still has required almost 2 years of gathering information, all this other stuff. That differentiates us a lot. And then the last part now is as we build things for enterprises, as we put new systems in place, we are learning a lot about what really matters to make something custom for every enterprise.
That sounds great. And you were talking about the White House specifically, and I think that's kind of important. So we saw that the Biden-Harris administration took a more stricter approach at regulating AI, or at least like relatively, not as strict as Europe, for example, who literally wanted like benchmark classifications for how dangerous models were, but still relatively strict compared to what Trump wants to do. And I think like, what do you think is the point of AI regulation that we need? Should it be strict or loose, considering like the current stage that we're at with AI development?
That's a fair question. I mean, my sense is that you want to look at it from a couple different points of view. Certainly we are, as you know, a public benefit corp. And as a public benefit corp, we headed up online. We care a lot about human society and people. And so I want to separate out a little bit regulation and governance, where governance can be something where we as a group say, hey, here are the things that we really want to do. And in my mind, the White House commitments were aligned with good governance. Regulations are certainly necessary in different places, but you have to be careful about over-regulating. That can stifle innovation. At one point, there was a call to stop all development. My sense is that was wrong-headed because that only the positive actors would do the actual following the regulation.
Now I want to take a step away from looking at the regulation and some of the own products that Inflection has made in the past. So I've seen what Pi does, your guys' chatbot. And can you tell me how it's unique from some of the other LLMs that are available for public use?
Well, first, it's useful to distinguish the LLM, the model, the large language model, from a chatbot. A chatbot actually is an orchestration of a bunch of things. In the case of Pi, we actually have multiple models, and we infer, depending on what you want to talk about, whether you should go to, say, a chatty model, or a really smart model, or, frankly, a safety model. And I think that's important for all of the companies that think of this. A bit like what I was mentioning earlier, one of the big distinguishing factors for Pi, particularly when it was built, but we continue to support this, is having really, really high EQ. Right? That is, when you and I are talking right now, kind of read each other's the language. You are saying right? So you're going back and forth. And these are important for communication. And just the reason that's valuable is that if you think about the Socratic process, right? We often learn or we process things in dialogue, in conversation. And so that's one of the things that Pi is really good at.
I think that's really unique because some of these other, chatbots from other companies, they rely on one LLM. As opposed to what you guys are doing. And that's I think the first major example I've seen of having these different types of LLMs behind the chatbot. It's almost like an agentic workflow, I guess. Not exactly, but because.
No, but it's the right orchestration for being able to do agentic workflows. And that's a good observation.
Next, I want to move a bit more about, or I want to learn a bit more about how you guys have been responding to what happened in last March. So for a bit of context, I learned that Microsoft acqui-hired a large amount of the staff that you guys had around March of last year. So what did it take to really rebound from that?
So first, let me make 2 clarifications. All Microsoft did is they paid for an IP license for our code. wasn't an acquisition, wasn't an acquisition. We're still a wholly owned, unique company.
Yeah.
It's really important because I don't want people to think that we're part of Microsoft.
No.
But you're right. Mustafa and other folks went over to Microsoft, and so there was a rebuilding and a refounding activity. Frankly, in my mind, a fairly unique activity where you have this ongoing, this company, you have the technology, and yet I needed to hire a whole new team for leadership, and then build out engineering and science and all these other things. Fortunately, the first choices you make can often be important. I hired an amazing CTO.
You made the right first choices.
I'd like to think I did, right? And you make things right, right? You sort of make choices around them. And in the case of Vibhu Mittal, he is a brilliant scientist, but also just a great leader and a good human being. He was one of the first 50 at Google, CEO of Edmodo, created Google Translate. And so he really understands his areas.
And a lot of technical experience.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. And between him and Ian McCarthy for products, and Ted Shelton for my COO, and now actually I've recently hired Doug Mandel as our counselor. You have a set of people you trust, and so you can move pretty quickly on the things that you do.
Yeah. And so I guess you were kind of touching on this, but it's been a lot of work to like rebuild out of that. So what are some of the other challenges maybe that you've encountered along this process in the past year or so?
Well, I mean, in some ways you brought up the first biggest challenge, which was just communicating to people that we were actively building and doing new things.
Yeah.
So, even this week we released and are using internally a new state-of-the-art model. I think I mentioned it hits some of the, like HelloSwag is hitting some of the highest marks on it. We have these new mixture of expert models. The big challenge was, first, making sure people knew that we were doing this activity. Second, that we were starting to apply this to enterprise. And then third, that we were doing this incredible innovation. I mean, it doesn't hurt that we are close to, we're a couple blocks off of Stanford. And so, I really do believe in sort of bringing community in as you do these things.
Yeah.
And so, we've had people giving talks, and we have guests coming in, we have people camping out and working with us, or doing some of their own thing.
Yeah.
That's part of the startup culture.
For sure.
Which I think is really important, whether you are paying it forward or whether you are giving it back.
And I think that's one thing that helps. It's like when you're in Silicon Valley, it's like you're around like all these fresh graduates, and there's like, I think that's why it's like there's so many new ideas blossoming around, and it's really creates that environment that you need to for innovation.
Yeah, and you would like to see, obviously we want to succeed.
Yeah.
You would like to see other people succeed too.
For sure. Yeah. And so I want to take a step away from that and maybe talk about some of the comments that you made in November of last year around like the direction that you want to take with Inflection. So you were mentioning that Inflection is going to move out of just like building AI models and maybe even venture into like building tools for enterprise. Yeah. So do you want to tell me a bit more about that?
Sure. You're right. I made that statement, and we have made good on the second. We have changed that first statement a little bit. The change in the first statement is that we continued to do some pre-training. We really worked on our fine-tuning work so that we do have a new class of models with more parameters than the ones we had previously. I mentioned mixture of expert models. We've got small ones that go down to 1 billion parameters, multimodal models. We have all of these things that we have built on. Right? So we haven't stopped that process. We're just not building out a 1 million GPU system for doing it. And so then how does that apply to the enterprise? Well, one, we take the work that we have been doing and give them, particularly where we see conversational intelligence having high value. But we've also, you were talking about the energy that comes from being in Silicon Valley. We have been able to work down to the metal and run on new platforms like Gaudi. So we still do NVIDIA, but we also run on Gaudi, and we have other platforms that we're working on as well. And do that so that we can take that to the enterprise so that not only do they have the highest quality model, but they also have a model that really focuses on private AI.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is they know what is inside it. They know what it's been trained on. Their data never has to actually leave their control, because that feels like one of the most important things that we've been hearing from companies is, we have this really critical piece of information, this data that is ours, and we really don't want it to leave. We don't want it to be in the hands of these other companies.
For sure, yeah. And so I really like that you brought up that, I guess, like the little correction to that statement in a sense that you're still working on these models. So I think one thing that kind of we should talk about is, so a lot of researchers and even like businesses and startups in AI are now trying to use AI models that are made by companies and then trying to maybe like retrain or use those for some particular purpose in solving some challenge in business. So I'm interested in, like, what does the process look like of actually creating your own new AI model?
Right. Let me give you a little bit of the reasoning and then the process. So the reasoning is important. So for instance, DeepSeek has been used by a lot of folks, and people are talking about distilling from DeepSeek. One of my concerns about that, I love the spread of innovation, so I think that's great.
Yeah.
But when you actually have to use it for something that is mission critical, and in particular something where you're going to make business decisions around it, you care about what's inside it. And there's this notion of epistemic security, which is, how do you know what's inside the model? Now, if you built it yourself, you know. If it was built by some other government, some other place, even if you think you are training some of these things out, you can't train everything out.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's sort of the unknown unknowns that are inside the model that matter. And that's why we continue to want to be able to have both the expertise and the ability to build these different models.
For sure.
Because we think we have better performance, better conversational intelligence, better security. So then how do we do it? There are a lot of different approaches to this. Some of it is a little bit like alchemy, and I literally make the joke about alchemy often because it does feel like there are these pieces of knowledge that have been passed from a set of folks who got it right on how to converge, more than a 70 billion parameter model, and get that convergence to work, because most companies can't. Right? They can't even converge a 7 billion parameter model, let alone 500, 800 billion parameter model.
Yeah.
And so we have an amazing team that works on the data ingestion, the preparation, how we actually are then going to iterate on that and pre-train, and then finally how we're going to fine-tune that. And we have been working with mixture of experts models. Do you know mixture of experts?
I have not.
I'll give you the super high level, because it's interesting in my mind.
Yeah.
Right? Which is that, in a way, your brain, in theory, it's all the same cells when you start off, but they start to specialize a little bit. You get modules. Yeah. Right. And prefrontal cortex, yours is still forming.
Yeah.
Mine's a little tired. But what's interesting about that is we're starting to see something like that in the way that we have models, where you have a mixture of experts, where you don't necessarily have to access all the parameters to do the inference. You might have, a subset of what we refer to as experts, but it's a subset of those models that then are connected, and so you're not actually lighting everything up. You're just doing the inference for parts of it.
Yeah.
And that has been we've been doing that for a while. That was one of the sort of innovations with DeepSeek. And anyone who starts to study this stuff, you find it interesting that there's a back and forth between the human brain and how we start to design these.
For sure, yeah. So up until this point, we've talked a lot about some of the changes that have came to Inflection, and like you trying to develop these new models while also working at enterprise. So I want to talk a bit about like the application of maybe some of the products that you guys are working on. Specifically, how do you think AI can be used to uplift small businesses, which right now have like so many challenges, from like understaffing to like even like a lack of marketing?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me get it in a couple different directions. Sure. One, there's never been a point in time before, except maybe the beginning of the internet, where small businesses could do some of the same things that large ones can.
For sure, yeah.
Particularly through, like we've made, one of the things when I started is we created an API to give access to the models. Right? if you're a small business, you can do that just like a large business.
Yeah.
You get that same quality. You don't even need the extra, hardware. I did some work once around carbon nanotubes and stuff. You need these tens of $1 million pieces of hardware.
Yeah.
You don't really need that to get the start, right? And then there are ways in which, and I want to emphasize, I think it's important for us to think about augmenting people, not replacing people. But you suddenly give someone superpowers so that they're augmented so they can quickly do some of the grunt work, whether that is inputting things into spreadsheets because you're inferring the things that go into it, or you are helping them to quickly edit a document that's going out, or you're even, a recent favorite application that we've seen people using with ours is where they're testing out how someone's going to take a message. So you might be sending me something, it's important, and so you can say, well, from what you know, Sean, how is he going to interpret this thing that I am now sending him? Oh, well, that's interesting. Maybe I'll shift this a little bit to make sure he understands it correctly. So there's a whole set of things, but it's also true for finance. It's true for, pardon me, true for how you work with people, and this is where I'd say that the conversational AI aspect of this, the people aspects of it, is really important.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I mean, it's a true honor to have you here, at this conference, and I know you're a very busy person, but thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having me. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
What are you interested in working on next?
Yeah, so one of the things I do outside of the podcast is I work on AI literacy efforts. So over 70% of schools in the United States, they don't have any sort of AI education or literacy efforts that are going on right now. So especially in the next few years, as I go into my senior year of high school and in my first few years of college, my main priority is going to be how can we expand access to AI literacy? So some of the things I teach are really based on what students want to know. Some students want to know to code. Others just want to know how these LLMs work on a high level. So what I do is I teach these students what they want. I've had partnerships with Boys and Girls Club, which is a national organization, and the Cleveland Metropolitan School District in Cleveland, Ohio, which is where I'm from. So I want to keep working with these organizations and schools and make sure that they have top of the line AI resources to ensure that these schools are going in the right direction, and that these people, even if they don't come from the wealthiest neighborhoods or the wealthiest schools, still have a good chance at having that future in tech, especially in the AI revolution.